Hi and welcome to our new YouTube tutorial. In this video we're going to be building a React application called Budget Up. The project is going to be based on React hooks and Context API. Nowadays those two tools are really popular, so I hope this project is going to be interesting and helpful. We already have a couple of React projects on our channel, so if you're interested you can go ahead and check them out. I will leave the links in the description. Alright, let's go ahead and first of all describe the project. The application consists of a couple of different parts. On the left side we have a header, budget up, followed by the total balance, and down below we have income and expenses separately. On the right side we have a couple of different inputs with the submit buttons, and down below we have transaction history. Okay, let's go ahead and see how this application actually works. Those two groups of inputs are for income and expenses. I can enter here the transaction text, let's say car sold, and then down below the amount, let's say 15,000. If I click the submit button or press the enter key, then down below we'll get our transaction with the text and the amount. And also on the left side, the amount of income and also the total balance will be updated. Let's go ahead and add an expense, let's say rent, and the amount $500. Now we got our expense transaction. Also the number of total expenses and the balance are updated. If I want to delete the transaction, I can click this delete icon. So the transactions are removed, and also everything is updated properly on the left side. Okay, so that's the way how our application works. Now we can go ahead and get started. I have created a new folder on the desktop called React App. Let's go ahead and open it in VS Code. Now I'm going to create React application. Let's go ahead and open the terminal. You can open it from here. You need to click New Terminal, or you can just simply press Ctrl with tilde key. Alright, before I run the command, I want to remind you that first of all you need to install Node.js, because we're going to create a React app using the Node package manager. So if you don't have Node.js on your machine, then first of all let's go ahead and install it. Once you install Node, then you can run npx create React app. And then we have to specify the name of the project. I'm going to call it Budget Up. Actually, this process may take a couple of minutes, so I'll be back once it is done. Alright, so the application is created. Now I'm going to run it to the browser. For that, first we need to cd into the folder. And then we have to run npm start. Alright, so the project is up and running. Lastly, let's organize our working environment a little bit. I'm going to place the editor and the browser like so, and get started. So in the source folder we have a couple of automatically generated files. I'm going to delete all of them because I want to start from scratch. Let's go ahead and create index.js file. Then bring in a couple of modules here. I mean React and React DOM. Actually, before I type here something, I want to show you one of the VS Code packages called ES7 React Redux snippets. This package allows us to write the code with shortcuts, so I recommend you to install and use this package. In order to import the React, we need to type just imr. So we have import React from React. As for the React DOM, we have to type imrd. Besides that, I want to import app components, which right now doesn't exist, but we will create it in a minute. So let's import app from app. And finally, in order to render the application to the browser, we need React DOM.render. This method takes two arguments. The first one is going to be the app component, and we have to insert it like the HTML tag. And then we have to select the root div element using getElementById method. Let's insert here id root. The root is the main div element which is placed in the index.html file in the public folder. So with the help of this element, the entire app is rendered on the page. Alright, right now we have an error in the browser because we have to create app component. So let's go ahead and do that. So this component is going to be the main component in which we will include all the other components. In general, the component could be either class-based or functional, and in this case I'm going to make it a functional component. In order to do that, we have to type here RAFCE. So as you see, the functional component is generated. Let's insert here h1 heading element with the text up. So as you see, now the application is rendered, and it means that everything works fine. Okay, so throughout this project, I'm not going to write any CSS code because we are focused only on React. Therefore, I will use the ready styles. I'm going to create app.css file. Then in the GitHub repository, I'm going to open the CSS file. Let's grab the entire code from here and paste it in the app.css file. So you can either download the entire source files from here, the link will be in the description, or you can just copy all the styles and code the application with me. If you download the source files, then you won't have the node modules folder. And the first thing that you need to do is to generate them using npm install command. Okay, that's it about CSS. We need to import CSS file in the app component. Alright, besides that, throughout this project I'm going to use font awesome icons. So let's go ahead and grab the CDN link. We have to search for font awesome CDN.js. Then we need to select here CSS and grab the first link. Let's open the index.html file, which is placed in the public folder, and then paste link in the head element. Alright. In order to apply some styles to our app component, I'm going to assign to the div element class name container. Then inside of the container, I'm going to create another div with the class app wrapper, and then insert the h1 heading element inside that div element. So now as you see, we have here some styles. I mean, the background of the container is different, and also the background of our application is changed. Alright, so now I'm going to create different components to build the user interface of the application, and after that we will take care of its functionality. Let's go ahead and create a new folder in the source folder. Let's call it components. And then inside that folder I'm going to create a new file. Let's call it header.js. So this component will include the heading budget up. Let's go ahead and make it a functional component. For that, as you know, we need to type RAFCE. Then assign to the div element class name header, and insert here h1 heading element with the text budget up. Next, we have to import this component in the app.js file. So we need here import header from components folder, and we need to select header. And then finally, let's insert it here instead of the h1 heading element. So here we have the header budget up. Okay, let's move on and create the next component, which is going to be the balance. It will include the total balance and also the amount of income and expenses. So let's go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to call it balance.js. Let's make it a functional component. Let's type RAFCE. Then assign to the div element class name balance. So I'm going to pass here two different heading elements. The first one is going to be the h2 heading with the text your balance. Next, I'm going to insert here h3 heading element. Right now, the amount of total balance is going to be hard-coded. So let's insert here, let's say 0.00. Okay, next we need income and expenses. Let's open div tag with the class income expense. Then open another div with the class plus. So we will have here heading and the paragraph. Let's open h3 heading element with the text income. Next we need paragraph, and let's insert here plus $sign and 0. Let's go ahead and duplicate div elements once, change the class name. We need here minus instead of the plus. Also change the text. We need expenses. And instead of a plus sign, let's put here minus. Alright, that's it about this component. Let's go ahead and render it on the page. We have to import it in app.js file. We need balance here, and then insert it down below after the header component. Alright, so as you can see, balance is displayed. It looks good, and we have to move on to the next component, which will include those input elements with submit buttons. So let's create a new file in components folder. I'm going to call it addTransaction.js. Then make it a functional component. Let's assign to the div element class name form wrapper, and then open form element. So it's going to be the form for the income. We will have two different inputs and the submit button, which will be the input as well. So let's open the div element and assign to it following classes. We need input group as the common class name, and also income as the individual class. Let's open input element with the type text. Also, I'm going to add here placeholder attribute with the value @income. And also I'm going to use autocomplete. Let's set it to off. It will allow us to hide previously entered values in the input field. Okay, let's duplicate this line of code. So the second input element is going to be for the amount. Therefore, I'm going to make its type number. When the input has a type number, you can enter only the numbers. Then change the value of the placeholder attribute. Insert your amount. And finally, we need submit button. So let's open again the input element. In this case, we need type submit and the value submit as well. Alright, that's it about the first form element. Let's go ahead and duplicate it and make some changes. We need expense instead of income. And also change the value of placeholder attribute. Let's make it @expense. Alright, that's it about this component. As usual, let's go to the app.js file, import the add transaction component, and also insert it here down below. So as you can see, we have here our form elements. Let's go ahead and move on to the next component. I'm going to create the list of income transactions as well as the expense transactions. So let's create a new component, call it income_list.js. Let's make it a functional component. I'm going to assign to the div element class name transactions. It's going to be the common class name, and besides that I'm going to use transactions income. Then insert here h2 heading element with the text transaction history. After that I'm going to open UL tag with the class transaction list, and then inside of the UL element I'm going to open li with the class transaction. So the li element will consist of three different parts. We will have two span elements for the text and the amount, and also we will have a button for deleting the transaction. In button I mean the font awesome icon. So let's go ahead and open span element with the class transaction text. As the text, let's insert here, let's say salary. Then duplicate this line of code. I'm going to change the text into the amount. Let's insert here 5,000. And after that we need to create a button with the class name delete btn. Then insert in it I element with the classes fas fa-trash. Alright, so that's it about this component. Before we move on to the expense list, let's render it on the page. For that we have to go to app.js file and import income list component. And also let's insert it here down below. Okay, so here we have our transaction. Let's go ahead and do the same for expense quickly. I'm going to create a new file. Let's call it expense_list.js. Then I'm going to copy the entire component from income list. And then we need to make some changes. I'm going to change the name of the component. We need here expense list. Then change the class name. Instead of income we need expense. And also I'm going to change the text and the amount. Let's put here rent and $500. After that, in order to render this component, we need to import it in app.js file. And then insert it here down below. So as you can see, here we have the expense transaction. Alright, so once we are done with the list of income and expenses, now it's time to take care of the state of our application. As we said at the beginning of this tutorial, we're going to use Context API. So I'm going to create a new folder. Let's call it context. Then create a new file. I'm going to call it global state.js. So first of all, let's go ahead and import React. Then we need to import create context function. Actually, this function will allow us to create a context. And besides that, we have to import one of the React hooks called useReducer. This method will help us to connect the reducer to the state. Okay, before I create a context, at first let's go ahead and create an initial state. So it's going to be the object, which will include two different arrays. The first one is going to be the income transactions. As for the second one, it's going to be expense transactions. So I'm going to pass here some hard-coded data, but eventually we will grab the data from the input fields. Actually, I have some ready data here, so I'm going to insert it in the state. You can create it on your own or just pause the video and insert it manually. Alright, let's go ahead and create the context. We need export global context. Then we have to use create context method, and we have to pass here the initial state object. Okay, after that we need to create a functional component. Let's call it global context provider. So in this case we're not going to use the useState hook. Instead of that we will use useReducer. If you are familiar with Redux, then you should know this kind of technique because it is quite similar to Redux. We will use dispatch function, actions, and so on. Let's go ahead and use array destructuring and grab the state and dispatch function. Then we need to use useReducer hook, and at first let's put here upReducer. Right now this file doesn't exist, but we will create it in a minute. As the second argument we have to pass here initial state. Actually it will be the value of the state that we destructured here. So now we have to return the context provider. We need to provide the state. Then we will wrap the entire application with that global context provider, and the state will be accessible from all other components. So let's go ahead and return global context dot provider. Make sure that you have closing tag as well. So as I said, we will wrap the application with the provider. In order to get access to the state from the components, we have to pass here children as the prop, and then we have to pass it down below as well. So again, the children will be all the components that exist in our application. Besides that, the context provider should have the value property. It will include the objects in which we can pass some data. I mean the data like the state and also the methods that will dispatch the actions. Right now I'm going to pass here the data from our initial state, I mean the income transactions. We need to assign to it state.income transactions. And then we need expense transactions. Again, from state, we need state.expense transactions. Alright, so that's it about our context right now. Next we have to go to the app.js file and wrap the entire application with the context provider. First of all, let's go ahead and import it. We need here global context provider in curly braces. We have to grab it from context folder and the global state file. Then let's go ahead and wrap here everything with global context provider. Alright, so the application is wrapped with the global context provider. As you see, we have an error saying that the upReducer is not defined. Let's go ahead and create it in the context folder. So the upReducer will include the switch statement in which we will define different cases like add income or expense or delete the transaction and so on. But we will do that a bit later. Right now we're going to use just a default case to proceed with our work. So we need to export the function. This function will take two parameters. The first one is going to be the state. So this state comes from the useReducer hook. As you know, we passed here two arguments. The first one is an upReducer and the second one is the initial state. As for the second parameter, it's going to be the action. In general, actions are pure JavaScript objects. They have one required property called type, and also they might have payload property as well. We will refer to the actions a bit later. Now let's create a switch statement. Then inside the parentheses, pass action.type and then use the default case. I'm going to return here just the state. Next, we need to import upReducer in global state.js file. Alright, so if we inspect the page and then check out React DevTools, actually it is a Google extension, so if you don't have it yet, then I recommend installing this extension because it is a really helpful tool when you try to build the application with React. So if I click here components, then you will see a couple of different sections. In the first one you can find our components and also the global context provider. If I click it, then down below you can find hooks, which has a reducer property. It includes our states, I mean the income and expense transactions, and now we can get access to the data from our components easily. Actually, I see here some error in the console. Let's go ahead and check it out. So we have here the warning message saying that we have invalid DOM property autocomplete. Actually, it should be written in camel case and not in lowercase, so let's go ahead and fix that. Let's go to add transaction component and change this attribute. Alright, so the warning message is gone. And now it's time to get access to our state and display the data dynamically. I mean to display the transactions in the lists. So let's go to income_list.js file. And first of all, we need to import the global context from context folder and the global state file. Besides that, in order to use context, we have to import another React hook called useContext. Okay, so we need to get access to the income transactions in our state because we have to display only the income transactions in the income list. So let's go ahead and use destructuring. We have to destructure income transactions from the global context. So let's use here useContext hook. And then we have to pass here global context. Let's go ahead and run income transactions to the console and see what do we have. So as you can see, we have here an array which includes all our income transactions. Alright, so in order to display all three income transactions, we need to loop through this array and display each of the objects as the list items. Right now we have here a hard-coded li item, so let's go ahead and map through the income transactions. We have to pass here callback function with the parameter which is going to be the current item from the income transactions. I'm going to call it income transaction. And now we have to return the li element inside of that function. So instead of that hard-coded text and amount, we have to pass here income transaction with the income text property. And in the same way, we need here income transaction with the income amount property. So as you can see, we have here all three income transactions. Alright, actually before we move on to the expense transactions and display them in the list, I want to transform this code a little bit. I'm going to create a new component, then we will put the li element in that component and also we will return it here. So let's go ahead and create a new component. I'm going to call it income transaction. Let's make it a functional component. Then I'm going to go back to the income list component. Let's grab the entire li element and paste it here. So right now in this component, the income transaction is not defined and somehow we have to bring it in here. So in this case, I'm going to use props. We need to pass here income transaction and the curly braces because we need to destructure it as well. Then go back to the income list component and import the income transaction. Then down below, return the income transaction component. We need to pass here prop income transaction with the value income transaction as well. Okay, so as you can see, we got here the exact same result. Right now we have a warning message in the console saying that each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So it means that each list item should have the key property with some unique value. In most cases we use ID. In this case, each of the transactions has ID property. Right now they are hard-coded, but anyway, let's use them. At the end of the day, we will take care of that. So let's pass here income transaction.id. Alright, so the warning message is gone. Let's go ahead and take care of the expense transactions. Let's create a new component, expense transaction.js. Then go to the income transaction component and copy the entire component, paste it here, and change income into expense everywhere. After that, let's go to the expense list component and import use context hook. Then we need to import a global context as well. Let's go to the income list and grab the code from here. And finally, let's import the expense transaction component. Alright, so after that we need to destructure the expense transactions from a global context. So let's grab this line of code from here and then change income into expense. Lastly, we need to map through the expense transactions and display them in the list. So let's go ahead and grab this code, paste it here instead of the li element and change income into expenses. Alright, so we see here the expense transactions as well in the list. So right now everything is ready to take care of the functionality of our application. We should program 3 different things. Adding transactions, expenses, and deleting transactions. Okay, let's go ahead and open the add transaction component where we have the form elements. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to create a new state, which is going to be the local state for this component. Let's go ahead and import use state hook. Then down below, create a state. I'm going to use array destructuring. We need here to pass income. and then set income. So I'm going to set income to an object which will have two different properties. The first one is going to be income text. Let's set it to empty string. As for the second one, it's going to be income amount, and I'm going to set it to 0. Alright, next we need to grab the values from the input fields. We have to grab the income text from the first input and the income amount from the second one. For that we have to use the onChange event. So let's go ahead and assign to the input elements onChange attribute and pass here a function name onChangeIncome. Right now this function doesn't exist, but that's not a problem. I'm going to create it now. Let's insert here event object. So now we have to use the setIncome method. In order to get the values from the input fields, I'm going to use the following technique. As you know, an event object has the property called target. It gives us the element on which the event is fired. In this case, it's going to be the input element. So to access to the needed input, we can use the name property. First of all, let's assign to the input element the name attribute. So the value of the name attribute should match the name of the property of the income object. In this case, it's going to be income text. As for the second input element, it's going to be income amount. So now we can pass here e.target.name as the property of the object. As you see, I used here brackets notation because we can access to the exact property name with the help of it. As the value, we need e.target.value. Okay, let's go ahead and run to the console income and see what this code gives us. So if I type something in the first input, then we will get the object in the console with the property income text and with the proper value that I typed here. But if I enter some number in the second input field, then again we will get an object, but with only the income amount property. So the income text property is overwritten by the income amount. So actually we don't need this, we have to keep both properties in the object, and in order to do that, we have to spread out the income object. Now if I type in both inputs, then the object will include the values from both input fields. Alright, so the onChange event is set up. Next we need to take care of the submit event. Each of the forms should be submitted once we click the submit button or press the enter key. That a new transaction should be added to the list on submitting the form. So let's go ahead and assign to the form element onSubmit attribute and pass here the function name onSubmitIncome. Then create a function with this name, onSubmitIncome, and pass here event object. So first of all, we need to prevent the default action of the submit button. Once we click the submit button, then the page will reload by default. In order to avoid that default behavior, we need to use e.preventDefault method. So the next thing that I'm going to do is to create the brand new object, which will include the text and the amount values that we enter in the input fields. Then we will dispatch that object into the global state. So let's go ahead and create here an object. I'm going to call it new income transaction. As you know, each transaction should have the unique ID. Right now we have some hard-coded IDs. And in order to generate a unique ID, we can use a couple of different ways. In this case, I'm going to use one of the NPM packages called UUID, which allows us to generate a unique ID for each newly created object. So let's go ahead and install UUID. Then import it. We have to specify here version 4 as UUID v4. from UUID. Finally, insert here ID property and assign to it UUIDv4. Alright, next we need to define an income text. The value is going to be the income text from the income object. So we need here income.income text. I think it would be better if we destructure properties from income object. So let's grab income text and income amount from income. In this case, we just need to pass here income text. But according to the ES6 syntax, if the property and the value are the same, then we can write it once. I'm going to do the same for the income amount as well. Alright, let's go ahead and run to the console, new income transaction. So if I fill the input fields and then click the submit button, then we will get an object with 3 different properties. We have here ID, income text, and income amount. As you can see, the amount is represented as the string value, and actually it's going to be the problem. So we need to transform it into the number, and you can do that in a couple of different ways. In this case, I'm going to use multiplication. If we multiply income amount by 1, then the string value will be transformed into the number because of the type conversion. So if I fill again the input fields and click the submit button, we will get a number as the value of income amount property. Alright, so that's it about add transaction component right now. Next we need to work in the global state. So the next thing that we have to do is to create a function that will dispatch the action to the reducer so that the newly created object will be added to the state. So let's go ahead and create a new function. I'm going to call it addIncome. This function will take one parameter, which then will be passed as the value of the payload property. It's going to be income transaction. So now we need to use a dispatch function. As you remember, we grabbed this function from the context. Inside the parentheses, we have to pass an action. As we said, actions are pure JavaScript objects. They must have type property, which defines what kind of action do we have. In this case, we add income transaction to the list. Therefore, we need here type to be addIncome. According to the convention, the value of type property is written in uppercase. Actions also may have an optional property called the payload, and in our case, the payload property will hold the newly created income transaction. I mean the object that we created in add transaction component. Alright, that's it about the addIncome function. We have to pass it down here in the provider. Then let's go to the app reducer file. Right now we have here just a default case, and we had to add here the new one. It's going to be addIncome. So if the action type is addIncome, then we have to return the following. First of all, we need to spread out the state. We are doing that in order to avoid changing the entire state. For example, in case of adding income, we need to update only the income transactions. So let's define it here. So we have to pass here at first action.payload, which holds a newly added income transaction. And then we need to spread out the rest of the transactions. So we need here state.income transactions. Alright, that's it about the reducer. Lastly, we need to go to the add transaction component and get access to addIncome function from the global context. Therefore, we have to import global context. We need to import it from context folder, and we have to select global state. Besides that, we have to import use context hook as well. And then we need to grab addIncome function from the context. Let's use the structuring. We need here addIncome. from global context. And finally, we need to call this function inside of the onSubmitIncome function. As the argument, we have to pass here new income transaction. Alright, so now it should work. Let's add here some test transaction. As you see, the new transaction is added to the list. So everything works perfectly so far, and now we need to take care of the expenses. I want to do it a bit quicker because expenses need the exact same functionality. Let's go ahead and duplicate here the state and those two functions as well, and change the names. Let's use a multi-cursor and select income everywhere. I mean income with the lowercase. Make it expense. Also select income with the capital I and make it expense. After that, let's add to the input element onChange attribute and pass here function onChangeExpense. Also, we need the name attributes with the values expense text and expense amount. And finally, let's assign to the form element onSubmit attribute with the value onSubmitExpense. Alright, so I think we have changed everything. Let's go to the global state and duplicate addIncome function. Again, we have to change the income into expense everywhere. Then pass this function down below. After that, we have to go to the up reducer. Let's duplicate addIncome case and again change income into expense. Alright, so the last thing that we have to do is to go to the add transaction components and grab the add expense function from the global context. Alright, so it should work now. Let's add an expense transaction. Alright, so it works fine as well. As you can see, once we submit the form, then input fields are not cleared. Let's go ahead and fix that. In the onSubmit functions, we have to set income and expense to the object with an empty text value. As for the amount, we have to set it to 0. So use here setIncome and then set income text to an empty string. As for the income amount, we have to make it 0. We need the same for expense as well, so let's use setExpense method. And then make expense text empty string. As for the expense amount, let's make it 0. Besides that, we have to add to the input elements attribute called value. For the first input, it should be equal to income text. Then we need income amount. The next one is going to be expense text. And for the last input element, we need expense amount. Alright, so if I add either income transaction or expense, input fields will be cleared after submitting the form. Okay, so we are done with adding income and expenses, and now I have to take care of the delete functionality. Once we click the delete icon, then the transaction should be removed from the list. In the case of deleting the transactions, we will have only one function. So let's go to the global state.js file and create a new function. I'm going to call it delete transaction. So in case of deleting transactions, we will use ID of the object. Let's pass it here as the parameter. Then dispatch the action. So the type of this action is going to be a delete transaction. As for the payload, it's going to be an ID of the transaction. Okay, and that's it about an action. We have to pass the function down below inside of the provider. Then go to the app reducer file and create a new case, which is going to be delete transaction. So we have to return the state again. I mean, we have to spread it out. Then in order to delete a transaction, I'm going to use one of the array helper methods called a filter. At first, we need to define income transactions. So we need to loop through the income transactions and return a filtered array. I mean, if the ID of the transaction does not equal to the ID of the payload, then this transaction should be kept in the array. So we need here state.income transactions. Then we have to use filter method. We need to pass here a callable function with the parameter, which is going to be the current item in the array, income transaction. So if the ID of the income transaction equals the ID of the payload, then this transaction should be removed from the array and the filtered array should be returned. So we need here income transaction dot ID not equals to action dot payload. The same we need for the expense as well. So let's go ahead and duplicate this code and change income into expenses. Alright, everything is ready. We just need to attach a click event to the delete button. So let's go to the income transaction.js file. Actually, I named this file as income transactions, but it should be income transaction. I'm not going to waste time on renaming it because we need to change the imports as well. So let's leave it as it is. You can rename it if you wish. So here we have a delete button. Let's add to it onClick attributes. Then we need to grab the delete transaction function from the global context. So let's go ahead and import at first global context from context folder and from the global state file. Also we need to import use context hook and then grab delete transaction from the global context. Let's use here destructuring. We need delete transaction. From the global context. Alright, now we have to pass here an arrow function. Then we have to call delete transaction function. And we have to pass here the ID as an argument. Because as you remember, this function had ID as the parameter. Alright, if I click the delete icon, then the income transactions will be removed. Okay, let's go ahead and do the same for the expenses as well. Let's grab the imports from income transaction component and paste them in expense transaction component. Also, we need to copy the delete transaction function. And finally, grab onClick event with its value. Okay, so if I try to delete expense transactions, then they will be removed. Alright, almost everything works fine. Now we have to take care of the balance. Right now it doesn't work. Let's go to the balance.js file, and first of all we need to import global context from context folder and from the global state file. Also, we need to import the use context hook. Next, we need to grab income and expense transactions from the global context. So let's go ahead and use the structuring and pass here income transactions and also expense transactions. We need to grab them from global context. Okay, so we're going to calculate the sum of income and expenses separately. As for the total balance, it should be calculated as the subtraction of total income and total expenses. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to collect and store income amounts in the variable. So let's go ahead and create a new variable. I'm going to call it income amount. I'm going to map through the income transactions and grab all income amounts. So we need to pass here callback function with the parameter income transaction, which is going to be the current item from the array, and we have to return income transaction dot income amount. We need the same for the expense amount as well, so let's go ahead and duplicate this code and change income into expense. Alright, so once we have income and expense amounts, now we can calculate the sums of them. For that, I'm going to use one of the array helper methods called reduce. Let's go ahead and create new variable. I'm going to call it total income. So we have to loop through the income amounts and sum them up. So we need here income amounts dot reduce. Let's pass here callback function, which takes two arguments. The first one is going to be the accumulator. It holds the current sum of the items. As for the second argument, it's going to be the current array item, I mean the current income amount. Alright, so in order to sum up the amounts, we have to return accumulator plus equals item. Reduce method accepts the second argument as well, which is the initial value. In our case, it's going to be the 0 because we don't need to add any additional value to the total sum. Alright, finally, I'm going to use another method called toFixed, which adds the decimals to the number. I'm going to pass here 2. Okay, that's it about the total income. We need to calculate total expenses as well. So let's duplicate this code and again change income into expenses. Alright, once the total income and expenses are calculated, we have to pass them down here instead of the hard-coded values. We need here total income and then total expenses. So as you see, we have here total income and total expenses calculated correctly. If I add here some transaction, then the data will be updated. And also if I delete the transactions, then again the data will be updated accordingly. Alright, let's take care of the total balance. Actually, it is quite simple to calculate. We need to subtract total expenses to total income. So let's pass here total income minus total expenses. And again, I'm going to use toFixed method with the value 2. Alright, so as you see, the total balance is calculated. If we delete or add the transaction, then it will be updated as well. Okay, actually we can say that we are done with the project. Everything works perfectly, but I want to add here one more thing. Right now, if I reload the page, then we will get again 3 transactions on both sides that we defined manually. I want to save the transactions which we will add in the future to the list, even if I reload the page or close the application and run it again. I'm going to do that using browser local storage. It allows us to save the data in the browser memory. Okay, first of all, I'm going to delete those default transactions. Let's make both arrays empty. In general, local storage stores the data in JSON formats. I mean, it looks like the pure JavaScript objects. It consists of key-value pairs. So if we add transactions, we need to store them in JSON format, and for that, we need to use the json.stringify method. And also, if we want to get the data from the local storage, at first we need to parse it using json.parse method. Alright, so in this case, I'm going to use another React hook called useEffect. It allows us to execute the function once the component is rendered or some piece of state is updated. So let's go ahead and import useEffect hook. Then use it down below and pass here callback function. So in order to send the data to local storage, we have to use local storage.setItem method. Actually, this method takes two arguments. The first one is going to be the name of the collection. I'm going to make it income transactions, and it should be the string. As for the second one, it's going to be the data which we need to send to the local storage. As we said, it's going to be formatted into JSON. Therefore, we need to use here json.stringify, and we have to pass here income transactions. I mean, we need here state.income transactions. Let's go ahead and duplicate this code and then change income into expense. Okay, let's go ahead and add some transaction. So if we check the local storage, actually we need to go to the application and click local storage. Then you will find that we have here the transaction. It is represented in JSON format. But if I reload the page, then the data will be deleted. That's because in the initial state, income transaction is set to an empty array by default. So we have to grab the data from local storage and use it as the value of income transactions property. So we need here json.parse. Then we have to pass here local storage dot get item. This method allows us to get the data from local storage. And we have to pass here the name of the collection, income transactions. Also, we need here logical OR operator followed by the empty array. So it means that if we have some data in the local storage, then we have to save and display it on the page. And if not, then the default value should be an empty array. The same we need for the expense transactions as well. So let's grab this line of code and paste it here. Let's change income into expense. Okay, let's go ahead and test how it works. Let's add here transaction. Then reload. As you see, now the data is saved and actually it works fine. Alright, before we finish this tutorial, I want to add one more thing to our project. Actually, if the text field is empty and I submit the form, then the transaction will be added anyway. I don't want this. I want to check if the input field is empty or not and then add the transaction. So we need to use an if statement in add transaction component. As the condition, we have to check if income text not equals to an empty string, and we have to pass this code inside the curly braces. The same we need for the expenses as well. So let's create if statement with the condition expense text not equals to an empty string. and pass here the code. So now, as you can see, I'm not able to add an empty transaction, so it works fine. Alright, so finally we're done with our project. I hope that it was interesting and helpful. We used React hooks with Context API, which nowadays is a really popular combination to use. So I hope you enjoyed the project and learned some interesting stuff. If you liked this video, then please thumbs up, comment below, share the video, subscribe to our channel and click the bell to get notified on coming tutorials. Okay, see you in the next video.